Episode 1, The Girl Who Forgot Her Name During the Exorcism. I remember the way she screamed, not like someone in pain, not even like someone possessed. It was louder than that. It was like her voice was trying to tear its way through another body, one that wasn't hers. Her name was Mara, 14 years old, the kind of girl who used to hum hymns under her breath when no one was watching. She came from the village north of our chapel, carried into the sanctuary by her father and a man who looked like they'd aged 30 years in 1 week. She was still screaming when they dropped her at the altar. Her mother stayed outside, wouldn't step foot near the door. They said the demon inside, Mara, had threatened to kill her if she ever saw her daughter again. So she didn't. The archbishop ordered an immediate exorcism. No waiting, no questioning. He simply looked at Mara, her eyes rolled back, her skin burning hot, and said, "Begin the rite." This is not her voice. We chanted. The incense burned black. Mara's scream slowed, then stopped altogether, and in the stillness that followed, a strange kind of peace came over her. She lay back, breathing calmly. "Is it over?" one of the men whispered. The archbishop approached, trembling but hopeful. He asked the girl, gently, "Child, can you tell us your name?" She looked at him with eyes as gray as storm water. Not the color of Mars, not the color of anything I'd ever seen in a living person. And she whispered, almost lovingly, "I don't remember." We told the villagers the exorcism had worked, that Mara had survived. But the truth, she wasn't Mara anymore. She didn't recognize her own reflection, didn't answer to her name, didn't sleep at night, just stared at the crucifix above her bed like she was waiting for it to blink. One evening, I caught her humming again, but it wasn't a hymn. It was the same melody she'd been screaming backward during the ritual. I asked her, trying to keep my voice calm, "Where did you hear that song?" She smiled, not like a girl, like something that had once been a god and fell too far to find its way back. "It was sung to me while I waited." I asked, "Waited for what?" Her answer, "For you to open the door." I frowned. See, the candle beside me flickered out on its own. And that was the first night I realized we didn't just cast the demon out. We invited something else in, and it remembered me. Episode 2, The Confession That Made the Crucifix Bleed. I was told not to get close. Father Elias warned me, whatever is inside that girl, it listens when you pray. But curiosity is louder than obedience. And Mary, if we can still call her, that was asking to confess. She walked into the confessional barefoot, silent. The wood creaked beneath her, though her steps were light. I took my seat on the other side, heart pounding, breath shallow. The air was cold, unnaturally so, like the booth itself had been buried for centuries and only now unearthed. I didn't speak first. She did. "Bless me, Father," she whispered, "for I have remembered too much." I cleared my throat. "You mean sinned?" "No, I said what I meant." Silence. I felt the weight of something ancient settle between us. "Would you like to confess?" "Mara," I asked, trying to hold the name like a weapon. "That's not my name." I pressed my back hard against the seat. "Then, who are you?" She ignored the question. Instead, she asked me something that tore the air from my lungs. "Do you remember what you did when you were 13? My hands clenched, my body tensed. That was a year I had buried under prayer, penance, and 100 quiet tears. How could it know that? That boy, the one you pushed, he didn't fall on accident, did he?" I stood, my throat closed. "I don't know what you're talking about," I whispered. "But, a thud, like we're cracking under pressure." I looked up. The crucifix above the booth door was bleeding. Thick, dark streams, oozing from the crown of thorns, running down the nailed feet, dripping onto the floor like tears from a wound heaven refused to close. And then came her voice, no longer a whisper. "Tell me, Father, do they still forgive sins you never spoke out loud?" I staggered out of the booth. She stayed seated, unmoving, like she wasn't just confessing, so was collecting. I sealed the confessional for the night. No one was allowed near it. The blood dried by morning, but the wood still smelled like iron and ash. Marano, it never asked for confession again, because it already knew everything. And whatever it wasn't seeking forgiveness. It was keeping score. Episode 3, The Room Behind the Baptismal Font. They say every church holds secrets, but some doors don't just stay locked, they're forgotten, buried behind plaster and holy water, hidden not by accident, but by design. It was Marano, a thing inside her which showed us. She was being led to morning prayer when she suddenly stopped in the nave. Didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared straight at the wall behind the baptismal font. There used to be a door there, she whispered, but you bricked it shut. After what happened to the twins, my blood ran cold because no one had mentioned the twins in 29 years. That was before I entered the seminary, before I even believed evil could leave stains behind. I went to the wall that night, waited until the church was empty and the wind outside was loud enough to cover sin. I tapped the plaster gently, hollow to hollow for stone. I scraped back a layer of paint and found what looked like a sealed wooden arch, aged and worn. Was Latin burned into the grain? Not painted, not carved, burnt. The words read, non redintroikus. Let not return the one who injured. I should have stopped, but something compelled me. Behind the arch, I found the hinges rusted, but intact, and when I pulled with both hands, the wall opened. The room inside hadn't seen light in decades. Cobwebs hung like curtains, dust danced like ash in my breath, and in the center of the room, an altar, but not like ours. This one was wrapped in chains, covered in wax that had never cooled, surrounded by old relics that looked holy but felt wrong. A child's rosary, a broken chalice, a mirror with no reflection, and then the journal, bound in red leather, stamped with the seal of our church, and the name of the exorcist who vanished in 1986. Father Mateo, the one who worked on the twin possession case. I opened the book. The first page read, they begged us not to finish the ritual, because the demon wasn't the only thing inside them. My hands shook. The wax around the altar began to melt, though the room was freezing cold. I heard a whisper in Mara's, not mine. You shouldn't have come back here. I turned to leave and saw wet footprints behind me, child-sized, bare, leading in, not out. When I sealed the room again, I told myself it would stay shut, but Mara was waiting for me by the font, still barefoot, still smiling. It remembers you now, she said, and it's almost ready to finish what was started. Episode 4. The Spirit Who Knew the Priest's Sin. We are taught that evil comes with horns and screams, that it announces itself in sulfur and shadows, but the one inside Mara, it comes quietly, and it knows things. It doesn't need to roar when it can whisper your shame back to you. It started during evening prayer. Mara Saturday in the front, pew unblinking, serene, like a child caught in the middle of a dream she didn't want to wake from. Father Elias approached the altar to lead us. The moment he raised his hand to bless the room, Mara turned her head slowly and spoke, "The cellar under your child at home, where she bled out. You never told anyone it wasn't an accident, did you?" That chapel fell silent. The candles flickered like they were trying to escape their own flames. Elias frowned. He didn't say a word, didn't move, only his eyes. They widened with a kind of guilt that doesn't surface unless it's summoned. I looked at him. This man had buried more sins than I had ever dared confess, but he never let it show until now. Later that night, I found Elias in the rectory. He was hunched over the baptismal basin, scrubbing his hands raw. The water had turned red, though there were no wounds. You didn't see her face. He said, it wasn't Mara who said those words. It was her, the girl I buried with my silence. He told me the story of the sister who slipped, of the scream he never admitted hearing, of the bruise he pretended not to see from around her throat before the water swallowed her. I was 13, he whispered, and I watched her die because I was afraid to be caught. Then he looked up at me, tears soaking his collar. It's not a demon inside that girl, it's judgment. The next day, Elias didn't show up for Mass. We found him in the bell tower, surrounded by prayer books all open to the same verse, Matthew 10-26. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. He was kneeling, eyes wide open, mouth stuffed with salt. A crude halo had been scratched into the floor around him, as if trying to fool heaven into thinking he still belonged. The worst of all, in the center of his chest, burned into his cassock, were the words, "I saw you, I returned to the chapel that night. Mara was waiting in the front pew again, like nothing had happened. I didn't touch him, she said softly. I only reminded him what he forgot to confess. Then she turned to me, eyes glowing faintly like kindlelight caught in holy water. "You'll be next." Episode 5. The Gospel she wrote while asleep. It began on the 7th night. The nun said Mara had stopped talking, stopped eating, stopped blinking unless someone entered the room. They thought it was progress. I knew better. Still, when Sister Clara came to my door pale and trembling, holding the papers in both hands like relics, I didn't expect what she showed me. "She wrote these," Clara whispered, but she was asleep. I took the sheets from her gently. Thick parchment. Odd, not from the church. The ink dark and almost rust color bled slightly into the fibers, but the handwriting, it was perfect. No hesitations, no corrections. Every word drawn like it had been etched by memory. In the language, Latin, but not the Latin we used in Mass. Older fragments from La Vitas Latina, blended with a dialect I'd only seen in dead, forbidden texts. I sat alone that night and translated what I could. The first line chilled my soul. "In the beginning was the silence, and the silence saw the light, and cursed it." It wasn't a gospel of salvation. It was a gospel of return. It spoke of a being cast out before time was counted. Not Lucifer, something older, something forgotten by heaven, but remembered by shadows. Each passage detailed what it called, but hollow in a divine void, left open during a war in heaven, where things not meant to be formed were born, and one of them was waiting to come back. I returned to Mara's room. She lay in bed, eyes closed, breathing slow like a statue dreaming. Pages covered the floor, the bed, even the ceiling above her, all in that same unbroken hand. Each page added seamlessly to the next, as if she wasn't writing, she was remembering. And then I noticed her fingers, crimson stained, but not from ink. There were no pens in the room, only a broken shard of mirror, and her fingertips, torn open, bone deep. She was writing in her own blood. I stepped back, horrified, just as her eyes fluttered open. Not startled, not confused, just calm. She looked at me, then at the pages around her. "It wanted to be read again," she said. "It wants to be believed." I asked, barely breathing, "What is it, Mara?" She smiled and whispered, "A gospel written before light touched the sky, one that was erased by the angels and buried under your church." That night, I burned the pages, every one of them, but the fire smelled sweet, too sweet, like incense soaked in rot. And when the last page turned to ash, I swear I heard a voice from the smoke say, "You can burn the scripture, but not the author." Episode 6. The nun who heard God weeping. They say God speaks in silence, but no one ever told us he could cry, and certainly not in our chapel, not through stone walls carved by saints and soaked in centuries of holy song. But Sister Agnes heard it, and she was never the same again. It was just past midnight when she rose from her cot. Something had pulled her from sleep, a sound, barely audible, not thunder, not wind. It was something closer, something softer, a whimper held back like it didn't want to be heard but couldn't help escaping. She followed the sound to the sanctuary, and there, alone in the flickering candlelight, kneeling before the crucifix, was Mara, motionless. Sister Agnes called out. No response, and she noticed the sound wasn't coming from Mara. It was coming from the altar itself. She moved closer, one trembling step at a time. The closer she got, the more she realized it wasn't just crying, it was weeping, ragged, aching, divine sorrow. It filled the air like I am trapped inside shattered glass. And then it spoke so faint, so raw, she thought her heart had imagined it. I didn't send her back. Sister Agnes fell to her knees. She had taken vows. She had bled for faith, but she had never heard God sound afraid. When she told us in the morning, her voice cracked in places that no scream could reach. She held her rosary so tightly, it had carved the crucifix into her palm, and she refused to speak Mara's name again. I looked into her eyes, Agnes whispered, and what I saw looked back, not at me, at him. I asked Mara that day, just once, what she was doing at the altar. She smiled softly, eyes gleaming like stained glass soaked in dusk. I wasn't praying, she said. I was listening. I asked, to what? Her voice lowered. To the part of heaven no one wants to admit exists. The part where the angels scream, and God can't look away. That night, Sister Agnes left the convent. No goodbyes, no luggage, just her habit, her sandals, and her silence. We found her days later in the woods, facing east, eyes wide open, lips stitched with her own rosary thread, and carved into the tree behind her. In delicate strokes, if God cries, who comforts him? Episode 7. The angel who refused to leave her. They called it a rite of protection, a ceremony older than the church itself, a summoning it of saints or spirits bit of a guardian. An angel? The idea was simple. If the demon inside Mara could see the face of heaven, it would tremble, it would flee. It always had, until now. The ritual required purity, fasting, salt drawn in sacred circles, prayers whispered in the old tongue for Vatican edits, and human fear softened the words. I was tasked with lighting the 7 candles, each flame representing one of the virtues. The final one faith refused to stay lit, even after 3 attempts. Still, we began. Father Domingo led the invocation. His voice deep, iron-bound echoed through the sanctuary like it was hammering the heavens. Mara Saturday, in the center of the circle, head bowed, eyes closed. For a moment, it felt like peace, like stillness before a divine answer. But then, the wind changed. The chapel doors flew open. Though they were bolted shut, the candles flickered and flouncy. Their flames turned blue, and from the rafters, something descended. Not visibly, but we felt it. Pressure, weight, like the sky had suddenly remembered how heavy it was. We waited. The air grew thick with expectation, but nothing entered the circle. No warmth, no winds, no voice from above. Only a silence so loud it made the bones ache. And then Mara opened her eyes. He's watching, she whispered, but he won't come closer. Father Domingo demanded. Oh, who is watching you? She smiled, almost sweetly. The one you begged for. He's standing at the threshold, but it won't step in, because I remember his name. From before, we broke the circle in panic. Candles burst like glass. The statue of Saint Michael cracked down the center, his sword arm falling clean off. And in the corner of the room, a feather, not white, not gold, gray, frayed, ash at its edges, like it had burned itself just by being nearer. Later that night, I dared to ask her again, what stopped the angel? She didn't blink, didn't even look at me, just stared up at the crucifix, like it owed her something. He remembered who I used to be, and he was afraid. There are things even angels won't confront. Things too old, too broken, too close to God's first mistake. And whatever is inside Mara, it wasn't banished by hell. It was left behind by heaven. Episode 8. The boy who died after touching her. They warned us not to let her near the other children. But it was Sunday, and Sunday makes people forget. Forget warnings. Forget danger. Forget that sometimes evil doesn't scream, it smiles. His name was Thomas, 9 years old, too curious for his own good. He followed Mara after Mass like a puppy, trailing behind her long black dress with innocent wonder. She walked with that stillness again, that silence that never felt empty, only full of something watching. I saw them near the statue of the Virgin. She was staring up at it. He was staring up at her. Then he said it, a sentence so simple, so human. Are you lonely? She didn't answer, just turned to him slowly. And that's when he reached for her hand. Small fingers, warm, alive. The scream came 3 seconds later. Not from Mara, not from Thomas, from Sister Irene, who had seen the moment their skin touched. I ran. The pews blurred around me. By the time I reached them, Thomas was on the ground convulsing, eyes rolled back, froth on his lips. His hand, one that had touched hers, was blackened, not bruised, burned, like it had been submerged in boiling oil. I cradled him as he shook. His skin was ice, but his mouth burned with the smell of ash. He muttered one thing before his heart stopped. Her name, her real name, is Rome. They said it was a seizure, said maybe he'd had a condition. The church needed something logical, palatable, but I saw his veins. They didn't collapse. They shriveled, like the blood inside him had run away. Mara was taken to her room and locked inside. She didn't resist, didn't cry, didn't ask about the boy. She just sat her day on her bed, eyes fixed on the corner of the ceiling, as if listening to something we couldn't hear. When I asked her why, she simply shrugged. He touched what didn't belong to him. I said, he didn't know. That doesn't change the cost. She replied, the sacred doesn't make exceptions. Not anymore. Thomas was buried under overcast skies. The crucifix on his casket cracked clean down the cinder during the final prayer. That night, I checked Mara's hand. Not a mark, not a scratch, but there was something under her fingernails. Flakes of white. When I rubbed them between my fingers, they sizzled. No one speaks his name now, but sometimes, when I pass the statue where it happened, I swear I see his handprint burned into the marble. Forever reaching, forever warned. And Mara, she hums to herself again. Not a hymn, not a lullaby. A warning, the first touch always costs the most. Episode 9. The prayer that opened the wrong door. There are prayers you don't find in any book. Words whispered into old stone, not printed on gilded pages. Prayers meant to close doors, seal wounds, bury things that heaven didn't want and hell refused to claim. But what if you say one wrong? What if the words meant to bind invite instead? It was Father Anselmo who said it. Old, near blind, and half broken by decades of exorcisms that left more scars than healings. He asked me for silence in the chapel that night, said he needed to pray alone, that he had found something in a book no longer in circulation. He didn't tell me where the book came from, only that it was older than the church and had been hidden behind the false wall in the archives. I should have stopped him, but he said the words so gently, so reverently, like he truly believed it would save Mara. I stayed near the back, watching from the shadows. He knelt in front of the altar, that same cracked crucifix above him. Mara was in her pew calm, as always, hands folded like she belonged in a stained glass window. And then he spoke. I didn't recognize the language. It wasn't Latin, not Greek, not Hebrew, but something in my spine recoiled. Something inside me understood one thing. Those words were never meant to be heard by living ears. The moment he finished, every candle in the chapel snuffed out. At once, not like wind, like consent. And the air, it shifted, not grew cold, but thick, like breathing through someone else's heartbeat. A sound rose from the altar, not from above. From beneath it, a knocking, soft at first, then louder, then answering. And Mara, she stood, but it wasn't her face anymore. It was still her body, but her eyes, they were remembering 8,000 years all at once. Father Anselmo turned, smiling. I sealed it, he said, but behind him, the altar began to crack, not from pressure, from something trying to come through. Stone split, dust bled from the seams, and from the blackness inside, a breath poured out hot, metallic, and old, and then a voice in Mara's, not Anselmo's, not human. That wasn't the closing prayer. It was the key. I pulled Anselmo away just as the floor beneath the altar began to cave. The others came running, but it was too late. The sanctuary was shaking while sweeping dark streaks, glass humming with pressure from beneath. Mara walked slowly out the front door, unbothered, serene. She turned to me as she passed and said, "You wanted to lock the door, but you never asked who was knocking. We sealed the church that night, boarded the altar with iron, painted over the cracks, burned the book, but nothing burns forever. And sometimes, I swear, I still hear knocking from the inside." Episode 10. The mirror that refused to reflect her. Mirrors are meant to tell the truth. That's what we were taught. No matter how twisted the face, how tired the ice glass never lies. But that was before Mara, before the mirror turned its back on her. It was Sister Juliet who first noticed it. She was preparing the dormitory, dusting the windows, wiping the frames when she glanced at the long silver mirror outside Mara's room, the one we placed there decades ago. After a nun claimed to see reflections that didn't belong to her. We never removed it, just stopped looking. But Sister Juliet did, and what she saw, Mara, walking past the glass with no reflection. She called me in a panic, swore on her vows it wasn't a trick of the light. So I checked it myself. I stood at one end of the corridor. Mara stood at the other, backlit by candlelight, calm as a statue in mourning. I nodded to her. She walked. As she passed the mirror, I watched it wide-eyed, unblinking. Her steps echoed, Her shadow moved, but the mirror, nothing. No flicker, no blur, just the empty hallway. Like the mirror had decided she didn't deserve to exist. That night, I stayed behind. I placed a candle before the mirror. I whispered prayers I barely remembered, and then I asked a question. What are you hiding from us? The flame dimmed, the air cooled, and for just 1 second, the mirror answered. Not in words, but in vision. Instead of the hallway, I saw a room, stone walls, dark stains, a silver basin filled with something too thick to be holy water. And in the center, a woman, not Mara, but she wore Mara's face older, regal, wrong, her eyes glowed gold, her mouth dripped scripture in reverse. Behind her stood figures with wings twisted, scorched, bent backward like broken hands trying to pray. They didn't move, they didn't blink, they just watched, and then she turned straight at me through the glass. You bury my gospel in ash, she whispered, but fire remembers. I stumbled back, the mirror shattered from the inside. Not a single piece hit the floor, they just vanished. When I told the others, no one spoke, not even Father Ortega, who never missed a chance to rebuke the supernatural. But later that week, something strange happened. Every mirror in the convent bathrooms, pockets, even the chalice polished to shine refused to reflect Mara. She could look straight into them, inches away, and see nothing. We tried to remove the last mirror near her room, but the wall behind it was warm, causing, and when we tore the frame free, we found something scratched into the stone. She walks beyond reflection, because her face was never meant to be seen again. Now, when she passes, we look down, we speak less, and we no longer trust glass, because if the mirror doesn't see her, maybe she's not just possessed, maybe she's remembering. Episode 11. The day the statues turned their backs. They never moved before. Not once in all my years among them. The statues stood with eternal serenity cast downward, hands flouncing mid blessing, robes carved to catch candlelight like folds of grace. But that morning, they had all turned around. Every single one. It was Sister Magda who screamed first. She'd gone to polish the statue of Saint Joseph in the courtyard like she did every Thursday before sunrise. But instead of the saint's face, she found his back, the marble shoulders hunched, the cloak stiff with dew. He was facing the church wall, silent, ashamed, or maybe afraid. We rushed inside, and it wasn't just Saint Joseph, Mary, Michael, Teresa, even Christ on the crucifix in the nave turned backward, nailed against the wall like someone had tried to hide his face. Somehow, overnight, the unmovable had moved. It didn't take long for us to suspect why. Mara was standing at the center of the sanctuary, barefoot, still, staring at the altar as if expecting something to rise from beneath it. I approached her, unable to keep the question inside. Did you do this? She didn't answer. Didn't need to, because in that moment, I noticed something carved into the marble steps of the altar lines that hadn't been there before. Words, faint, like breath turned to scripture. They turn away from what they helped create. The statues were checked by hand. No signs of human tampering. No base rotated. No foundation cracked. Just turned, as though something had walked through the church during the night. And they refused to watch. Even the statue of Saint Michael the Archangel, the warrior of heaven. He had dropped his sword. It lay at his feet, his head bowed toward the stone. Defeated, that evening, I found Mara sitting beneath him. She was tracing the edge of the fallen sword with her finger. He remembers, she said softly. They all do. I asked her what she meant, and I'll never forget her reply. Before he was a statue, he was a soldier, and once, a long time ago, he bowed to me. The chapel smells different now, not of incense, not of old wood, but of dust, like something is eroding the holiness from within. The statues have not turned back. We've covered them with sheets. We no longer pray beneath them because it's hard to worship what has already walked away. Episode 12. The Mass where heaven closed its eyes. We called it a cleansing Mass, a final attempt to reclaim what had been desecrated. That chapel still smelled of silence. The statues were shrouded in white. No mirrors remained. No crucifix had been rehung. But the bishop had arrived, and he came with incense and certainty. He came to cast out darkness with scripture alone. He didn't know that heaven had already looked away. Mara was seated in the first pew, dressed in white, hair braided, hands folded so perfectly, she looked like an angel carved from living ash. The bishop stood before the altar, his voice boomed with old Latin, his robes sweeping like thunderclouds across stone. The choir began to sing, but halfway through the first verse, the doves fell. They had nested high in the rafters for years, never disturbed, symbols of peace, of blessing. But no, they dropped like stones, one by one, wings limp, necks twisted, no sound, no flutter, just thuds, as if gravity itself had judged them. People gasped, some screamed, but the bishop raised his hand and continued, Dominus vobiscum. Mara turned her head, and for the first time, I saw something like amusement behind her eyes. Not joy, not malice, just the quiet smirk of a creature unimpressed by pageantry. Then the earth groaned, not loudly, just enough for every chalice to tremble, every candle to flicker. The bishop shouted the right louder, desperate now, pushing the words like weapons. But we all felt it. Something behind the altar had awakened. The stained glass windows began to dim, not break, not shatter, just lose color. The saints inside them faded, faces blurred like old memories being erased in real time. And above us, in the vaulted dome, the image of Christ painted centuries ago. His eyes vanished to blank sockets, now looked down, not in sorrow, not in rage, but in absence. I knelt, I don't know why, maybe out of fear, maybe to plead, but the bishop, he turned to Mara, voice trembling. What have you done? She rose slowly, graceful, deliberate, as if she had been waiting for the question. And she said, I didn't blind heaven, it just couldn't bear to watch anymore. The bishop collapsed at the foot of the altar, not dead, just broken. His hands covered his eyes, and when he finally opened them again, they were filled with blood, tears that had no explanation, no wound, just a message. The congregation fled. Some crawled, some ran, none looked back. I stayed, and Mara walked past me, through the center aisle, like a bride leaving her own wedding, with no groom left worthy of her. That night, I dreamed of heaven, not shining, not glorious, just empty. And somewhere deep within that silence, a voice whispered, you let her speak. And now, even angels cover their ears. Episode 13, the name that should not be spoken. They told us that names have power, that to speak a name is to summon it, to remember it, to give it shape again. Some names are sacred, some are forbidden, and then there are names that were buried on purpose. The Vatican sent no more priests, no letters, no answers. The chapel was declared in silentdom, a place under holy lockdown. But Mara remained. She no longer slept, no longer ate. She walked the halls like a psalm left unfinished, like a verse that refused to end. She was waiting for someone to say the thing none of us dared. It was Father Castell who broke. He was the last of the old guard, the one who never flinched, never questioned, until they found the page, hidden beneath the floorboards of the altar, curled and brittle, ink black as coal, and on that page, a single name scorched into the parchment, a name I cannot repeat, a name that had been scratched out of every scripture, erased from every litany, burned from every tongue that once dared to speak it. And still, it waited. That night, Father Castell locked himself in the sanctuary. He lit all the candles, drew the salt circle, kneeled at the center, and he said it. He said the name. I don't know how I heard it. I wasn't there. But the moment the name passed his lips, every bell in the chapel rang out on their own, and then silence. No wind, no breath, just a pulse so deep, it felt like the whole world forgot to exist for a heartbeat. I found him slumped at the altar, eyes open, mouth frowning midward, his body untouched, no wound, no struggle, but he was gone, like the name had taken him in exchange. Mara stood at the doorway. She hadn't entered, not yet, but she looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't smile. He spoke the name. She whispered, now it remembers itself. I asked her what it meant, what we had released. She stepped into the sanctuary, and every candle snuffed at once. She placed her hand on the altar, and it did not burn. Instead, the cracks in the marble began to glow. Red, then gold, then white, and I felt it, a presence, not evil, not holy, something before both. And then she said, "It wasn't a demon inside me. It was a forgotten part of him. The mistake heaven never forgave itself for." I fell to my knees, not in worship, not in fear, but because my body couldn't carry the truth any longer. She turned to leave, not as a girl, not as a vessel, but as something new, or maybe something returned. And before she walked into the darkness beyond the chapel door, she looked over her shoulder and whispered so softly I still don't know if I imagined it. "You were never meant to hear that name, but now it knows yours, too." No one has seen her since. No birds return to the steeple. No statue dares to face the altar. And the mirror in my room cracked the moment I looked at myself and couldn't see only me.